So let's get started. Sanne, what are the different approaches that you see in this area?
Yeah, usually you say that some of the key drivers behind process documentation, mapping processes, BPM, is one of those three here. Compliance risk, of course, you want to have make sure you can satisfy the requirements of external and internal stakeholders in regulated industries. So you need to prove that you have your processes documented and perhaps even that you are executing them. So that's one area, risk reduction. The second one, IT implementation risk, is also one of risk reduction, but there we often see processes being met because you're implementing a big system like an ERP system or a large CRM solution, or somehow working with your IT. And there, of course, you have a need to understand the business requirements, and one way of doing this is to map them out as business processes. The final driver is efficiency, and this is where you're really looking at process improvement, of course, and you want to remove waste and so on. And the cases that I have with me today is one of IT implementation risk and one of efficiency. And I just want to show how the starting point can have a big impact on how suitable the solution is to engage employees in your process documentation. So if we take the first case, I should mention these cases are cases that I have worked with, but I cannot reveal the names of them because I'm revealing what would be confidential information. But the first case was a consultancy appointment some years back for a multinational manufacturing company. They were preparing for a global ERP implementation. So this is very much the case of reducing IT system risk. But the situation was this, that they needed to specify for a company-wide ERP system, and they set up a process excellence team under global IT to lead this effort and on a continuous basis to really keep these processes updated. So it was very much, the focus was very much to underpin the ERP system, which of course was a multi-million-dollar effort. They selected a very advanced tool, BPM tool, and one of the main selection criteria was that it integrated very closely with the future ERP system. So what they did in this case was they mapped out more than 200 processes that were somehow in the scope of the ERP project, and they did the ERP functionalities that they were using, the modules, really set the scope for the process architecture. One thing they did was they mapped it with a light version of the BPM notation language. So they didn't use they made it lighter for end users to relate to this. When we talk about mapping, they were using swim lanes and they were mapping to roles. But in this case, the roles were very much system roles. So they were the roles defined by the ERP system's functionality. And of course, that already means that it's a role such as, approve or defined in the system, but not that people necessarily see themselves in. The results they got was that they had processes. They ended up with processes that were one-to-one aligned with the ERP system, but essentially an ERP system, as you know, is very rigid. It's not very flexible. That's the nature of it. But then making processes that exactly reflected the ERP system made the processes quite rigid as well. So all of this, what I'll get to, it made it very difficult to get broader adoption afterwards. So in this case, they were, and they still are, I think, in competition with group quality and with the lean officers. These were There was a process excellence team, there was a group quality function, there was a lean function, and they were all politically struggling and fighting a little bit about who owns the right to say how we work in our company. And I think this is really, this was a challenge, because since the process excellence team was part of IT, clearly it was difficult to get the position that we represent how the business is done in the company. So end result of this case is really that the processes were not and are not used by employees. It's just a matter of specification for enterprise and system architects. So whenever there is a change in the ERP system, it is mapped and changed in a process, and then you have essentially what is systems documentation. So the team was looking for ways to make this process documentation useful to employees, but they didn't find it. So on that parameter, this case failed. Of course, they did deliver on the objective of specifying for ERP. But I think that is one extreme, and that is the normal actually you see out there. And this is probably one of the reasons why BPM is not as embraced by business users as some of us would like to see. The second case is very different. This is a company, a consumer service, I would call it, a company where they had a lot of locations and they needed to expand with many more locations. So the situation was this, that they needed a very standardized way of working. The challenge they had is that they couldn't always get high quality managers for their locations. So they needed to standardize how they were working, so the requirements of each manager as high. The result of this should be that they had a lower average number of help requests per location to all these central regional managers, so that they found a model that was more scalable and didn't require so much of the central support desks. Secondly, they were also looking for ways to lower risks of errors. For instance, they had set up a lot of procurement agreements, but they realized that there was a lot of, I think, what you call maverick buying, where people divert from the process and just buy from a local supplier that they prefer. So in order to realize some of these volume contracts and get the value out of it, they needed to make sure that people were actually following the processes. So of course, here the starting point was really the people of the organization, and they selected Gluu for its ability to easily create and manage work instructions. It was very much the work instructions that were at the center, where processes were more a way to manage who can view what and who can edit what. So imagine you're navigating the process as you, I think, will show, Louise, but sometimes you can enter the process, sometimes you cannot, but information that you should be able to see will be available, and you can still see who to talk to if there is some confidential information in an HR process or something like that. So at the center was really the work instructions here, and what they ended up with at I think a year after the project was complete was about 559 business processes with an average of 3 to 4 work instructions per process. And we could see that 80% of the locations were accessing these work instructions at least monthly, and 60% of them at least weekly. So this means every time you were looking for a supplier for changing lighting, how do I hire a new employee? How do I terminate an employee? How do I do this or that? They would look it up in the system. So it was very much like a common knowledge repository. They saw that in this case that the central, the numbers, the calling to the regional managers dropped as well. So they did achieve the goal of lowering the call volume. And then at a later stage, they there was a need to be more GDPR compliant, and they got a consultancy company to help them. And the anticipation would be that they needed to map out all the different, I think it was about 150 processes that had personal data interface, and that these processes would have to be mapped out by the consultancy company. But then they realized that the processes were already there. So this was a great example of reusing processes for another purpose. And because they were being worked on by the real users of the organization, they also did reflect reality at the. So it was really a big saving in consultancy cost here. And I think that last point is important because it shows how there is a chance of combining the different drivers or different instigators of BPM, and the most important conclusion is that you really have to put people at the center. This is really the strategy for making BPM useful and updated, and ensuring that you are not creating process documentation that no one uses or very few people use. So I think with these two customer cases, you can see that when the starting point is you are doing something for a system, then you will never satisfy the needs of the people in the organization. But if you take the starting point of the organization and say, we are doing common ways of working, well, then with that starting point, you will achieve the other objectives of compliance, because of course is the whole basis of compliance, but also IT. If you have an insight into the actual ways of working of people, it's a much better basis for documentation or systems requirements for an ERP system, because you're realizing that there's a lot of activities outside of the system, and then you know exactly of a bigger process, a bigger end-to-end process, where does the ERP system support? It doesn't become system-centric where you cut off the real process that the users see. So I think from my perspective, from my experience, this is really at the core of success, that the true starting point is the need of people for clarity, for common ways of working, for a common language of how they work, really. And that should be the starting point. That's really the key point of this webinar, I think. But of course, the challenge is always, if you want to do this, how do you strike the balance between the needs of this common system where you have to standardize and the needs of the individual users? And this is where I know, Louisa, you have prepared some more specific examples of tactics, using Gluu a little bit as a backdrop, but more to show how you can find a good balance between top down and bottom up, really. So please show us something more specific than what I'm talking about.
Yeah, sure. I'll take you guys on a tour of Gluu in a minute, and how it can be done in Gluu. But I think, Son, what you just said, having people in the center is really the heart of the Gluu philosophy. You need to center everything around your employees if you want your processes to be more than just a library of processes, that you might be able to use it on a strategic level, but as a tool for top management. But if you want it to become an actual tool for your organization and to ensure that people actually work the way the process is designed, then you also need the bottom-up part. Because as you already know, Søren, and for your guys' information, my field of expertise in Gluu is within customer success. And what we see with our customers is that a lot of them are very focused on working with the top-down part. So the part that's all about your process excellence team doing your process hierarchy and mapping everything out. But the part that most aren't very focused on is the bottom-up part, where you actually get your employees involved in your processes. And that's really what we're trying to do with Gluu, to make it a tool that is good for both for process experts that are working with processes, mapping them out on a daily basis, but also for the end user, the regular employee, actually working in the process. And that's what I would like to show you guys, because it's not enough to look at the APQC 1 to 3 levels if you want to have success in having your processes used. You also need to be very focused on level 4 and 5. So here we're talking about work instructions and tasks.
Maybe Louise, we should mention that for those who don't know it, APQC is an American process hierarchy where you break processes down through 1 to 5 levels, just so people know.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sometimes when you're so your mindset is so focused on processes, you forget that not everyone knows all the abbreviations. Okay, so let me take you guys on a little tour of our platform to give you an idea of what this could look like in reality. So what we're looking at now is the Gluu platform. We're logged in as the account owner. In this case, you can see his name in the top right corner. His name is Hans. And he's able to see the full process hierarchy of this company, also structured around the APQC model. But say he's just a regular employee, so now he wants to find a process in Gluu. So he wants to know something about claims and non-conformities, for instance, because that's what he's involved in. So he'll just use the search bar and go straight to the process.
If I may add something, this was the most common thing people would do in that second company I talked about, where they had so many thousands of interactions. They would have a joke that they would Google it and they would go in and search and find it, and that was the primary use case.
Yeah, and it's a very good point in terms of that first question we put in our webinar invite. How do you actually turn your processes into interactive guides for how work is done? Well, one thing is the way you draw your process or map it out, and I'll get to that in a minute. But that ease of navigation of the whole platform where you have your processes is also very important, because if you expect a regular employee to scroll through 150 or 200 processes, then you'll lose them even before they ever get to the process that you want them to look at. But this is what a process in Gluu looks like. Let me just zoom out a little bit so we get a little bit more of the process. As you can see on the left-hand side, we have these green bars with our roles for each swim lane in. I'll get back to them in a minute. And then we have all our different objects, and the blue boxes are our activity boxes. And if we click one of the activity boxes. What we'll see here is the work instruction for this specific activity. It has some text telling our employee what we would like them to do, what they should be aware of. There's also a video here to guide the employee. You can, of course, also add photos or files or whatever you need as part of your work instruction. And we actually also allow the employee to leave a comment, as you can see at the bottom here. So let's put a comment here just for the sake of it. So this employee, Hans, that we're logged in as, he thinks that this work instruction needs work. So he puts that comment here or that suggestion. And as you can see, it now appears here on the work instruction. We'll get back to in a minute what you can do with that comment afterwards.
Lisa, if I may add something, it's a little bit like what we are trying to recreate is the closeness that you see in a factory setting. Like we are, of course, very inspired by the lean philosophy, not the tools necessarily, but the philosophy of being able to see what is happening. So the process represents the flow through the company. It's a little bit like the old the assembly line of the manufacturing company, but we're trying to create some of that same closeness. But the instruction that you were just showing is really the closest thing to the workstation, to where you have, like in Lean 5S, you would have all your tools at the right place. And if that mindset is coming in here, then you have a much easier time to do the work efficiently, but also with fewer errors. And that's the same thinking. But the common function in that respect is also to say, something is missing, something is wrong, we have a problem, we have an error. That has to be left right there in the context, just like the person at the Toyota assembly line stopping the assembly line and saying, we have an improvement opportunity. Just wanted to put that perspective on it.
Yeah, and it's a very good point, Son. And it's, I mean, the comment function in Gluu allows you to, in a sense, talk to your colleagues, even though they're not there, just as if you were standing next to them on the factory floor somewhere. So you're able to communicate with them about this specific work instruction.
Yeah, you could say today things are happening always across time and space, and that's we still have to capture the input, regardless if we're working at the same time in the same time zone, and that is also another challenge of today's work, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's also the good thing about having your work instructions as part of your process. Because when we look at this process, now we just saw the work instruction a minute ago, but this process also tells us who is responsible for carrying out this task. So it reduces confusion about responsibilities as well, which was our second question for the webinar invite. Here we can even, if we click at this green bar, it says customer service rep, we'll even get a job description. You can add whatever information you'd like. Here we offer different options, but here you also let your employees know what is their job in with this role. It of course shows you what processes this role is used in, besides the one we're looking at, but we can also see which of our colleagues have this role. So if I need to talk to one of the customer service people, well, then I know I need to talk to Alicia or Anton. And that helps connect the company, because like you said, Søren, now we're so used to things being across time and space, and we're working from home, some are in the office. So In Gluu, you are able to really gather all the necessary information for your employees to be able to carry out their jobs and to follow the process that you would like them to. So they know who does what and how it's done, and they're able to communicate in the right context with their colleagues or their team leaders about this specific process.
If I may add, then you can say the role description is also a very important assumption of the level of detail that you need to map and the level of detail you need to put into the work instructions. Because if we can already assume that we have a customer service representative that has a certain level of training, maybe in different systems and so on, then the job of describing what they should do becomes a lot easier, because you don't have to describe it for someone completely uninitiated. You are describing it to an experienced customer service rep, maybe. So the description can be shorter, but it also means that people can see themselves in the process because they have this role, they know the role. It's not some kind of a system role that they can't relate to. It's something that they see themselves as doing every day. So it clearly maps the activities to that person and thereby making it more relevant for the person. Also to speak up if they disagree with things.
Oh, excuse me.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, and it takes us to the next question of this webinar: how to delegate process ownership for quality and relevance. Because one thing is knowing your process, how you're supposed to do it and who's supposed to do it, but it's also very important that you connect the management level and the process owner with the people working in the process. So in Gluu, that's very transparent. You can always see here in the top right corner who the owner is. So the owner of this process is Kate Smith. So I know that if I need to, as a regular employee, if I need to contact her, but I can also see the editors of the process, because it's very important in our perspective, in our opinion, that you make sure to decentralize process ownership. If all processes are owned by top management, then they're not owned by anyone in reality. You need to delegate process ownership so that the people that own the processes and adjust them as the way of work changes are actually people that are truly involved in that process work. Because in that sense, in that way, you get all that important information that we all know our frontline employees have, but that can be very difficult for an organization to pick up. It also means that when you have this this level of transparency and you have delegated that ownership, then the people working in the processes actually do feel an ownership for that process, and that means that they're much more likely to follow it and to help make continuous improvements as well. If you look at the page we're on now, it also shows us all the members that are part of this process. That's also something that Gluu helps you with quite a lot. And that's very useful in terms of making sure your processes are used. Because if we go back to the process and we and we decide that we want to change something to our claims process, then we need a way to communicate that change as well, if we want to make sure that all the employees working in the process are aware of it. The way that Gluu is structured, we actually make that very easy for you. So we will notify your employees, and that way you keep the communication going. So you establish what we call a feedback loop. You're able from a management level to communicate changes to a process. And like we saw before, your employees are also able to make comments on that process. And that creates this beautiful feedback loop from frontline employees to top management and back to the employees, which is what you need to keep working with continuous improvement. And if we look at that a little bit more, we'll use that comment that we just made, because when you make a comment to a process, even you can make it on a process level or at a activity work instruction level. And in our case, we, as you see here at the very bottom, we made it at a activity work instruction level. So it appears here in our process feed. So if our process owner were to log in and see this this comment that we also notified the process owner about when it was made, the system sends out an email. You actually have different options here. You can turn a comment into a change suggestion. You can also reply to a comment saying that's a good idea. We will do that, for instance. Or you could ask more questions to clarify what the employee that made the comment actually referred to or wanted to achieve. And once you've turned it into a change suggestion, you'll also have the option of moving it through different stages. And all of this becomes completely transparent for all your employees that are connected to this process. They'll be able to see all the communication. They can add their 2 cents or good ideas as the discussion about this suggestion is ongoing. And then you can finally implement it as a part of your process and inform all your employees that there is now a better way of doing this process. And that way it also helps you with that final step of ensuring actual implementation of the change, not just to the process, but actually making it a change to the way that your employees are working.
Yeah, so I guess it's a little bit like that problem that happens on the assembly line, and someone stops the assembly line and everybody gets over and they start discussing, we have a problem, what are we going to do with it? This is, I guess, a little bit the same, right? Trying to recreate that closeness across time and space, even I guess you could also be taking a photo of something and you could be adding more data, but still talking about the problem, the idea in the context of the activity, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, something that we do see with a lot of our customers is that they all want to work with continuous improvement, but they're finding it very hard to create a good framework, a good structure around that, ensuring that they get all that feedback picked up and converted into actual process improvements. What we see most of them doing is that maybe once a year or once every 2 years, they do this major process review session with loads and loads of processes and loads of employees involved. It takes a lot of time and resources. It's a very heavy process to get through. And they don't get all the good feedback, all the process improvements that they could have, because a lot of that will be happening in conversations between employees after that review session is already over and done with. But by using Gluu in this way, we offer you that framework, so your employees don't have to use little yellow post-it notes and leave them on their team leader's desk, or send emails, or call the process owner making their suggestions. You can actually link them directly to the process now that they're relevant to, by doing it this way. And it also, convenience is quite important here as well, because if you have an employee on the factory floor that has a good idea or needs to report an error or a bug or something, then the chance of them doing it is significantly higher if it's easy to do, if they can do it right there by their workstation, and it only takes them a few minutes, instead of remembering what it was that they wanted to report, writing it down on a piece of paper and handing that paper over to someone, or writing that email, or so it's also about removing some of the barriers for employees to actually give all their good input and share their knowledge with their colleagues as well.
If some tactics here, because the case that I mentioned earlier, where they managed to engage the front line employees, there they made a very simple choice to say, you know what, you're not going to be calling any of the central support desks or regional managers before you looked the problem up in Gluu, and you asked the questions. You saw if the question had already been answered in here. So it was more like you do customer self-service. This was like employee self-service, but they made sure to channel everything here. And that's when these things become much more engaging, because other approaches we've seen is that if it becomes a little bit more like, well, if you happen to have an idea, you can put it here. That's not as effective, because you need a certain volume before these things start moving, and before it starts to become interesting for people to participate in.
Yeah.
Another point in that regard is also that if the work instructions are so generic and so non-helpful, because they just say what you already know, then nobody's going to respond to them or react to them. So it also, if you get into something that is useful and people start responding, it's a very nice indicator that people start caring about the business processes. They're actually trying to follow them and do it. And that's when you really opened up that continuous improvement channel you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly, Simon. If you, as a manager, receiving these suggestions from your employees, also respond to them and make sure to change their status as you work with them, you are also showing your employees that their input matters, and that motivates them to keep giving you that good feedback, without it being a big job to do for the management level, because there is a good framework already to handle it in Gluu.
Yeah.
But Søren, how would you say that this fits into the rest of the Gluu platform? Because now we've looked at the understand part of Gluu, and at the beginning of the webinar, I also mentioned that there is an execute and an improve part. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that for us.
Yeah, well, of course, it's all really designed based on the lean philosophy. So I would say that it really, the first thing you need to do is to establish a common baseline, common understanding of how work is done. And you need to make sure that this is actually how work is done. And that is really where there's a lot of work for a lot of companies to even get there. But of course, trying to guess that people are actually, like the case I mentioned earlier, trying to guess that they're actually following the procurement process is one thing. But if you could even execute the procurement process, so you know for a fact when this center bought services or products worth at least 100,000, that they followed the process, and you could document it, that's a completely different level of compliance, and it makes it a lot easier for people to relate to everything. So the same thing goes with improvement. So we see that.
And just because before you move on to improvement, in case we have anybody watching that is not so familiar with Gluu, what does it mean when you say execute the process? How do you do that in Gluu?
Yeah, you're right. We call it semi-automation, but it's like an orchestration that the process is run. So like the example you saw with the claims, you used the example of this claims handling. So it's about making sure that the tasks are actually executed across all the different roles in the process for each case, where you can go to the level of tracking each case. Some of it is done by people via apps, some of it is done by robots or by systems, but you want to have an end-to-end flow, and maybe you need to be able to prove it for compliance. So that's that part of it. And improvement.
So basically, you're able to add tasks to your work instructions, and then have your employees carry out those tasks, and then that's all documented in Gluu. So if you're a team leader or a part of management, you'll be able to see what did we actually do, when did we do it, do we have any tasks that weren't carried out, or something that wasn't done the way it was supposed to be.
Yeah, it's really very simple. It's like if you could have that perfect manager who could run around with an instruction and delegate tasks and follow the end-to-end process. That's what we want to get into a process so it runs automatically. But the benefit of this is also that you get lots of ideas for improvement, but you also start to get the data. So if you know why in this end-to-end process, why is this activity done, and then it always takes 5 days before this one starts, is there something we could do to improve the throughput time? So you have both that human qualitative input that you mentioned, but you also have the data if you get to this level. But the point, I think, is that these are all ways of making processes more relevant for people, because if you see them enhancing your productivity, reducing your error rate as an individual, then you are more likely to take that path. So it is really another trick just to engage and be relevant for the end user. And what we've seen now, and this really talks to the other objectives of BPM, we see that when you start mapping your work instruction with the systems you use, then you can create those systems as components, and you can essentially let your end users map all the relationships of the business. So when you are doing your ERP implementation and you want to find out the existing ERP system we have, which processes are dependent on this, then you will know exactly which activities are using the ERP system, and you will know much better what to do with the new, because it's mapped more in accordance with real needs of real users, rather than a few short workshops in the beginning of a project, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is the point. By serving the end user, you are also serving IT, and you're serving all the other constituents in the business.
Yeah, exactly, because that was just what I was about to say. By doing that, by you then you actually know your processes. So when you are making or trying to do the specs for your new ERP system, you actually know what you need, not just what you want.
Exactly, and I think many people are in the audience may be thinking about, okay, well, that's what you can do with process mining. But of course, process mining is very useful if you're inside a system and you know if you know exactly what is happening and the volumes are high. But if you're talking about end-to-end processes that mix different systems, different people, manual activities, phone calls, everything, that's when you really need to get you need to find other techniques. And that's what we are trying to do a little bit here, to say we are actually looking at what people are doing, but there is also a level of mapping and creating work instructions and then seeing how people are using it. But the end result is the same. We want to see on one hand what people's intentions are, but also what they really do. And that can inform our process improvement efforts.
Exactly. And I think just to finish off this little section, maybe just say a few words about the improvement part of Gluu, because we've talked about that feedback loop that we want to establish by making processes relevant and turning them into tools for our employees so that they actually work the way the process is mapped. But what about the improve part? Because we say understand, execute, and improve as the final step.
Yeah, the improve is like, yeah, two main different things. One thing is just to say, as you establish a baseline for how you work, and how you say you work in the process and how you actually work are the same. That requires a lot of little improvements, because many times learning in the organization is faster than the process. So these things will have to be updated. But then you get to the point of these two, the process and the actual behavior, being fully aligned. And that's when people start to get a common understanding of something. And that's when you can see in a lot of cases that people can contribute with a lot of improvement, very incremental improvement, of course. And then once you have, you can say, harvested all this low-hanging fruit, that's when you maybe want to look at re-engineering the process itself, maybe creating an entirely new version, because we cannot get any further with the current way of doing things. Maybe we want to buy robots, or we want to outsource the process or something like that, right? But it all starts with how we work, and full alignment of how we say we work and how we actually work.
Yeah, I mean, understand and execute are the basis of the improve part of Gluu, because we take all the data that we generate or that our employees generate, and then we look at that in the improve part and say, okay, is there more we can do? Is there more we can do to improve this process or to improve our end-to-end processes? And then that's when it becomes very interesting. When you've generated that data in the first two steps of Gluu. Yeah. Okay.
But you mentioned Gluu, but I also hope this is a mindset that people who are using all kinds of other tools that are watching this can use, because it's more of a philosophy and a mindset. And of course, we're just trying to build a tool that exactly matches the mindset. But of course, you can get far if you have a much smaller scale with other ways of doing it.
Yeah.
Just hoping it can inspire.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. That's more or less what we wanted to share with you today, but we've had a few questions during the session. So the first question is whether the process functionality is built upon BPMN 2.0 or if it's a Gluu BPM variation. And to just quickly answer that question, you can do both in Gluu. We have what we call our standard simple process mapping drawing tool, which is built upon BPM N 2.0, but is a Gluu variation of that. And then you can also access all the BPMN shapes if you want to use that as your starting point for processes. So you have that flexibility in our tool.
Yeah, but if I may add also, swim lanes are always a part of the process mapping we do, because the first question to answer is who does what, and this is where you bring in the people. So if you want to put the people at the center, you don't get around having a notation language that maps your activities to people. But of course, there are many other ways of doing it for different other needs, and in those cases, maybe other tools are more suitable.
Yeah, sure. And then we also got a question about how to get management on board for the decentralization part. I'm assuming that means how do we get management to accept that the process owners should be department heads or team leaders, and they should have editors, instead of just putting everything in a process excellence department.
Yeah, and I would say we typically see a development over time where people are used to strong hierarchies because they don't really know what people lower in the hierarchy are doing. So they need to control, that they get to work and control their jobs more or less. But and they tend to apply the same thinking to processes, even though it's not very conducive to this type of thinking. But what we see is over time, there is you appoint more and more process owners, so you delegate more and more, and you allow for more and more input. I see a lot of cases where you're worried that people will start to write crazy stuff in the comment section and all that. But we usually say, you know what, everybody can already do this with email distribution lists and all that, but they put their name to it, so it's a very natural tendency. And sometimes you do want to listen to that stupid question that's really not a stupid question, because a lot of other people are thinking the same. So we only see benefit from opening up, but of course management has to see this happening very gradually. Maybe you pilot one process, you do it for certain processes, some you don't. We are allowing some processes to be very broadly shared, so everybody gets a notification of a comment, and others are only going to the top management. So of course, if you're working with thousands of frontline employees, you don't want to have everybody spamming everybody all the time. But it really is about realizing that if you get transparency, well, then you can give up a little bit of control, because the reason you wouldn't want to give up control in the first place was you were afraid you wouldn't know what was going on. But in this world of technology, everything is fully transparent, right? So,
yeah, and it's actually also for us as a company, for new customers, something that we offer to assist the process excellence team or the person responsible for process work in the business with having those conversations with management, giving our perspective on why it's important and what the value is of approaching it that way, instead of in a more traditional sense. So we're happy to offer that as well.
For me, I think you see it with the younger generations. This is definitely the way of the future. They expect to be heard. And even though I know we are a little bit more extreme in this case in Scandinavia, in a lot of countries, their young generations are demanding the same. And if you as a company can provide this way of being heard, I think it will only be received positively. And but of course, it requires also that you listen and you respond and you have active process owners. If you don't, then better wait a little bit.
Yeah, but that's actually also underlining the importance of decentralizing process ownership, because if you have users or employees that are working in a process and they're asking questions, you need to know what the process is all about to be able to answer those questions and engage in that communication, that interaction with them. And you cannot do that if you centralize process ownership in a process department.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the process owner is the business expert on the topic, but not necessarily the process expert. This is why a tool has to be super easy to use, because you are looking for the one who can truly engage with the users and decide if improvement suggestions are worthwhile or not.
Yeah,
it's really a business improvement manager more than anything else, right?
Yeah, very true. Right, so you and I could talk about this topic for hours and hours, but I think it's time to end this session for today. The recording of the webinar, as always, will be available on our YouTube channel, but also on LinkedIn if you joined the event there. So if you have any questions, please also feel free to reach out to us after the webinar, send us an email, or contact us via the website.
Yeah. Well, thanks for an interesting conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Everybody.
Bye, everyone.